In a two-story house in a quiet residential neighborhood in the Chicago suburbs, Jessica Miller was brewing her morning coffee while gazing out the kitchen window at the garden. The October morning air was chilly, and the maple leaves were painted in brilliant reds and yellows. She was living fulfilling days as the sales director for Philadelphia Biotech, a major pharmaceutical company. "Good morning, honey." Her husband Robert, who had come down the stairs, gave her a light kiss on the shoulder. He worked from home as a freelance web designer. They had been married for 7 years, but had no children. It was an intentional choice. When Jessica's career was gaining momentum and Robert had just become independent, they had discussed and postponed having children. Before they knew it, the topic had gradually drifted away. "I have an early meeting today," Jessica answered while washing her mug. "There's a new project, and executives are coming from headquarters." Robert took orange juice from the refrigerator and poured it into a glass. His brown hair was slightly disheveled, and he was still in his pajamas. One of the advantages of working from home was not having to rush to get ready. "Looking at your work performance, I bet it's about a promotion," Robert said with a smile. "Your sales results from last quarter were fantastic too." Jessica showed a slightly complicated expression. While her department's performance was indeed good, it was also the result of frequent business trips and long working hours. She had business trips to regional cities or overseas once or twice a month, sometimes being away from home for more than a week. Robert always showed understanding, but sometimes when she saw his lonely expression, her heart ached. "But I want to spend more time at home," Jessica said honestly. "I want more time to spend with you." They had met when Jessica was still a sales representative. When her company was considering a website renewal, Robert's small design company was one of the candidates. In the first presentation, Jessica was attracted to Robert's creativity and sincerity, and continued talking with him even after work was finished. 3 months later, they began dating, and a year later they were engaged. In the early days of their marriage, they thought they had built a perfect partnership. Jessica's stable income and Robert's flexible work style maintained an ideal balance. Robert actively shared household chores, and when Jessica returned from business trips, he always welcomed her with warm meals and a clean house. They were envied by the neighbors as an ideal couple. However, recently, Jessica had begun to feel subtle changes. She sensed a distance in Robert's attitude that hadn't been there before. When she talked about business trips, instead of enthusiastically supporting her as before, he increasingly showed a thoughtful expression. Also, his demeanor when she returned home felt somewhat distant. "You don't need to worry," Robert pulled Jessica close to him. "I'm proud of your work, and I want you to succeed. Leave the home to me." Jessica felt reassured by his words. Marriage had its ups and downs, and it was natural for both of them to have busy periods. She trusted her husband and believed their relationship was strong. In the car on the way to work, Jessica listened to the news on the radio while thinking about today's meeting. If the new project succeeded, she would certainly see a clear path to promotion. On the other hand, it would mean more responsibility and probably more frequent business trips. While waiting at a traffic light, she looked back at the house. Robert was probably sitting in front of his computer drinking coffee by now. Thinking of his gentle smile, Jessica smiled. No matter how busy work got, her loving husband would be waiting when she came home. That was the most important thing to her. As Jessica had anticipated, a big opportunity came her way at that day's meeting. She was appointed as the leader of Philadelphia Biotech's European expansion project. This could be a decisive turning point in her career. However, there was one major condition. She would need to go on a 1-month business trip to Europe. "We'd like you to conduct contract negotiations with local medical institutions and sales agents in 3 countries, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom," Division Manager Michael Grayson explained in the conference room. "Considering your sales record and language skills, we've decided to entrust you with this important project." Jessica felt excitement and anxiety simultaneously. Her longest business trip so far had been 2 weeks. A 1-month period was uncharted territory for her, and probably for Robert too. However, if she missed this opportunity, who knew when the next similar chance would come around? That evening, Jessica told Robert about the business trip over dinner. Contrary to her expectations, Robert's reaction was complicated. 1 month, Robert put his fork on his plate and sighed deeply. That's a long time. But this is really important for my career. Jessica took her husband's hand. If I succeed, promotion to deputy director won't be just a dream. Then I could reduce the frequency of business trips and have a more stable life. After thinking for a moment, Robert smiled. If you feel that strongly about it, I'll support you. I can also make good use of my time alone and concentrate on new projects. Jessica was relieved by those words. Robert was always a wonderful husband who understood her. 2 weeks before departure, Jessica was overwhelmed with preparations. Creating business plans for the trip, arranging meetings locally, and handing over work to subordinates. She worked late into the night with documents every day, and the time she spent with Robert became even less. Make sure you eat properly. The night before departure, Jessica said while stuffing the freezer with Robert's favorite frozen foods. And you know how to use the washing machine, right? You worry too much, honey, Robert embraced her. I'm an adult, so I can take care of myself. You focus on work and achieve great results. On a cold November morning, Jessica boarded a flight from O'Hare International Airport to Frankfurt. Looking down at the Chicago cityscape gradually becoming smaller from her window seat, she felt a touch of loneliness. At the same time, however, her heart was racing with anticipation for the new challenge. The first week in Frankfurt went smoothly. Negotiations with a major German medical equipment manufacturer proceeded more smoothly than expected, and they were able to reach agreement on an initial contract. Every evening, Jessica called Robert from her hotel room. How was today? Robert's voice sounded warm even over the phone. Wonderful. I'm moving to Paris tomorrow. Jessica couldn't hide her excitement despite feeling tired. How about you? Is work going well? Pretty well. I got a project from a new client and I'm keeping quite busy. However, after moving to Paris, the frequency of contact decreased. There was the time difference, but increasingly she couldn't answer Robert's calls. When she called back, it often went to voicemail. He must be swamped with work, Jessica told herself. She herself was chased by meetings and negotiations from morning to night, and returned to the hotel exhausted. Negotiations in Paris were more difficult than expected. The French pharmaceutical company representatives were cautious and needed to discuss detailed conditions repeatedly. However, through Jessica's persistent negotiations, they were finally able to reach a basic agreement. When she moved to London in the 3rd week, Jessica was able to have a long conversation with Robert for the first time in a while. However, there was a somewhat tired tone in his voice. How are things at home? Jessica asked. No particular problems. It's just that when I'm alone, I don't feel like cooking, so I've been eating out a lot. Robert gave a wry smile. When you come back, I think I'll miss home cooking. Just 1 more week. Just a little more patience. The last week in London was an important period for comprehensively summarizing the results so far. Contract negotiations with a major British pharmacy chain were complex, requiring meetings with lawyers about legal details. However, Jessica's expertise and meticulous preparation paid off, and she was ultimately able to conclude satisfactory contracts in all 3 countries. On the last night of the business trip, Jessica thought of home from her London hotel room. The 1-month period had felt longer than she thought, but it had also been fulfilling days. She had proven her abilities and achieved valuable results for the company. Promotion after returning home was almost certain. In the last phone call, Robert said in a bright voice that he was preparing to welcome her. I'm going to cook your favorite dish and wait for you. I'm looking forward to the day I can say welcome home. I want to see you soon too, Jessica answered from her heart. I'll be home tomorrow night. The next morning, Jessica departed from Heathrow Airport for the return journey to Chicago. On the plane, she reflected on the past month's experiences. It had been a great success work-wise, but she had some concerns about her relationship with Robert. The subtle distance she had felt during phone conversations bothered her. However, she convinced herself that it was probably a natural reaction to being apart for such a long time. When she landed at Chicago Airport, Jessica took a deep breath of her hometown's air. The December cold was harsh, but the joy of going home made her forget the cold. In the taxi, she tried to contact Robert on her cell phone, but couldn't get through. She thought he must be busy preparing dinner. Entering the suburban residential area, familiar scenery welcomed her. However, as she approached home, she began to feel that something was different. She didn't know what it was yet, but a small anxiety was sprouting deep in her chest. The moment Jessica opened the taxi door, her feet froze. The front door was half open, and light leaking from it illuminated the snow-covered entrance. However, what surprised her more than that was that the living room window glass was broken. "Could you wait a moment?" Jessica said to the driver in a trembling voice. "Something's wrong." The driver turned around, looked at the house, and frowned. "Ma'am, you should call the police. There are clear signs that someone has broken in." Jessica's heart was beating violently. Where was Robert? If he had encountered an intruder when he was home. Various bad thoughts raced through her mind. Robert. She called her husband's name loudly, but there was no answer. Following the driver's advice, Jessica called 911 with trembling hands. After waiting about 10 minutes, the sound of police car sirens echoed through the quiet residential neighborhood. 2 patrol cars arrived, and 4 police officers got out. "You must be Mrs. Miller," an elderly police officer approached. "I'm Detective Thompson. Have you been able to contact your husband?" "No, he's not answering his cell phone." Jessica's voice was shaking with anxiety. "I just returned from a 1-month business trip." The police officers began carefully examining the surroundings of the house. At that moment, another car arrived. Robert got out of the car looking flustered. "Jessica. Are you okay?" He ran over and hugged his wife. "I just got back from the gym." "What happened?" "The house has been ransacked." Jessica felt relief in her husband's arms. "I'm glad you're safe." Detective Thompson approached the two. "Mr. Miller, when did you leave the house?" "About 3 hours ago," Robert answered. "I often go to the gym on weekends. I was surprised by this situation when I came back." While the police officers investigated inside the house, Jessica and Robert waited outside. The December cold wind stung their cheeks, but Jessica's shivering wasn't just from the cold. "How does it look inside?" Jessica asked Detective Thompson. "It's quite ransacked," the detective answered gravely. "The living room, bedroom, study, everything is scattered. However, there are several strange things." "Strange things?" Robert frowned. "I'll tell you the details after we look inside. Shall we go in together to check?" The moment they stepped inside the house, Jessica gasped. The living room's sofa cushions were thrown and scattered on the floor, and books from the bookshelf were strewn about. The TV was intact, but small items around it had fallen to the floor. "Could you check if anything has been stolen?" a young female officer asked. Jessica and Robert carefully went through each room. Strangely, expensive electronics and jewelry remained untouched. Her pearl necklace on the bedroom dresser and the large TV in the living room hadn't been stolen. "Nothing seems to have been stolen," Robert said with a puzzled expression. "What does this mean?" Detective Thompson answered while taking notes in his notebook. "Recent burglars often target cash or small valuables. However, there are several puzzling aspects to this case. The detective explained while pointing. First, the way the window glass is broken. Usually, when someone breaks in from outside, the glass fragments scatter inside. However, most of the fragments from this window have fallen outside. Jessica frowned. What does that mean? It means it might have been broken from the inside, the detective said, choosing his words carefully. Also, there are no signs that the front door lock was forced open from the outside. Robert's complexion changed slightly. But that's impossible. I locked it properly when I went out. At this moment, another police officer ran over. Detective, please come here. We found something interesting in the bedroom. Everyone headed to the bedroom. A small woman's earring had been found under the bed. It was clearly expensive, with a small diamond attached. Is this yours, Mrs. Miller? The officer asked. Jessica took the earring and looked at it carefully. No, it's not mine. I don't own anything with this design. The atmosphere in the room became heavy. Robert was clearly agitated. There's something else that concerns me, Detective Thompson continued. The neighbor's security camera might have captured part of this house. Also, we've received concerning testimony from the mail carrier. What kind of testimony? Jessica asked. He said he saw a young woman coming out of this house last week. Since he knew Mrs. Miller was away on business, he thought it was strange. Robert's face turned pale. That's surely a mistake. It might have been a cleaning service. Did you hire a cleaning service? The detective asked sharply. No, I didn't, Robert stammered. At this moment, Detective Thompson made eye contact with Jessica and nodded slightly. His experienced intuition had sensed the truth of this case. Mrs. Miller, could we talk outside for a moment? The detective said quietly. I'd like to explain something about processing the scene. Jessica looked back at her husband, but Robert just stared at the floor without saying anything. She followed the detective outside. Under the cold night sky, Detective Thompson looked around and then spoke to Jessica in a low voice. Mrs. Miller, this isn't just a robbery. Jessica gasped. The anxiety she had felt deep in her heart was about to become reality. What do you mean? Her voice was trembling. The detective looked around again, making sure they were definitely alone before continuing. Actually, your husband might be involved. The detective's words froze Jessica's heart colder than the December night wind. Based on security camera footage and neighbors' testimony, a young woman has been regularly coming and going from this house during the past month. Jessica's world began to crumble. During her month-long business trip, while she was devoted to work, what had her husband been doing? Further investigation is needed, but, the detective continued, judging from the scene conditions, this is likely a cover-up disguised as a burglary. Probably someone who knew about your return panicked and ransacked the house to destroy evidence. Jessica's legs wobbled. The events of the past month raced through Jessica's mind like a revolving lantern. The subtle distance she felt during phone calls with Robert, the unanswered calls, and his tired-sounding voice. Everything now made sense. Do you have evidence? Jessica asked in a trembling voice. Detective Thompson nodded. Mrs. Johnson next door's security camera captures part of your house's entrance. We've already reviewed the footage, and during this past month, the same woman has definitely been coming and going from this house 3 or 4 times a week. Jessica's knees shook. The detective continued while supporting her shoulder. Furthermore, that woman sometimes returned late at night. She clearly appeared to be living here. So, today's ransack situation. Jessica tried desperately to maintain her composure. Probably someone who knew about your return schedule panicked and tried to destroy evidence. However, because the work was sloppy, they left even more unnatural traces. At this moment, another police officer came out of the house. "Detective, we found something interesting in the study." The officer was holding a transparent evidence bag. Inside were a small bottle of women's perfume and several long brown hairs. These were hidden in the back of a study drawer, the officer reported. There are clear signs they were hidden in a hurry. Jessica stared at the perfume bottle. It was a completely different brand from what she used, a sweet scent popular with young women. "Mrs. Miller," Detective Thompson said quietly. "We need to question your husband. Also, we need to analyze the security camera footage more carefully and identify that woman." Jessica took a deep breath. It was painful to accept reality, but she needed to know the truth. "I understand. Please investigate everything." When they returned inside the house, Robert was sitting on the living room sofa with his face covered by his hands. When Jessica approached, he looked up. His eyes were red, clearly having been crying. "Robert," Jessica said quietly. "Please tell me. Tell me everything that happened." After a long silence, Robert finally spoke. "Jessie, I did something irreversible." Detective Thompson approached and after informing Robert of his rights, formal questioning began. "Her name is Amanda Smith, 26 years old," Robert began to speak haltingly. "I met her 3 months ago through work. She asked me to design a website for a small cafe." Jessica listened quietly, but a storm was raging in her heart. "At first it was purely a work relationship. But when you were busy and away from home more, I felt lonely." Robert hung his head. "That's no excuse though. So, during my business trip, you brought her here." Jessica's voice was cold as ice. "When you decided to go on the 1-month business trip, she was in trouble. She had problems with her apartment lease and needed somewhere to stay temporarily," Robert continued painfully. I wanted to help her." Detective Thompson interrupted. "So when you learned that Mrs. Miller's return schedule had moved up, what did you do?" Robert's face turned even paler. "Actually, I had the wrong day for your return schedule. I thought you were coming back today, but she said you were coming back yesterday." "She did?" Jessica asked in surprise. "Amanda called your company to confirm your return schedule. And last night, when we found out you were coming back today, she was furious." The detective leaned forward. "So what happened?" "She thought I had been lying to her. She realized I had no intention of separating from my wife and became enraged," Robert continued in a trembling voice. "Last night, she threw things around the house and went on a rampage. She broke the window glass from the inside too." Jessica was speechless. Her husband's betrayal alone was shocking enough, but the fact that this woman had rampaged through her house was even more humiliating. "So I panicked and tried to make it look like a burglary," Robert confessed through tears. "But I didn't know how to make it look natural." Detective Thompson said with a stern expression, "Mr. Miller, you will be charged with false reporting and evidence tampering. Also, Ms. Amanda Smith will be investigated for property damage." At this moment, another police officer brought security camera footage. On the small monitor, a young brown-haired woman was indeed frequently coming and going from the house. In last night's footage, the woman was also recorded coming out of the house in a furious state. "This footage will be used as evidence in court," the detective explained to Robert. "We also have multiple testimonies from neighbors." Jessica sat down on the sofa. It was difficult to accept the reality that 7 years of married life had collapsed in one night. However, at the same time, there was also a sense of relief that the identity of the discomfort she had felt during this past month was finally revealed. "Robert," Jessica looked at her husband. "Why didn't you tell me honestly? If you had consulted with me from the beginning." "I didn't want to lose you," Robert answered through tears. "But in the end, I lost everything." The next morning, Amanda Smith was arrested at the cafe where she worked. She initially denied it, but when confronted with security camera footage and physical evidence, she admitted to the property damage charges. Intimate message exchanges with Robert were also discovered on her cell phone. Robert was charged with false reporting and evidence tampering. He deeply regretted his actions, but could not escape legal responsibility. It was also reported briefly in the local newspaper, and his credibility in the web design industry was severely damaged. A week later, Jessica was consulting with a lawyer about divorce proceedings. The emotional wounds were deep, but she was determined to positively rebuild her life. Due to her success in Europe, her evaluation at the company was high, and promotion talks were progressing. Claiming alimony is also possible, the lawyer explained. Considering adultery and the mental anguish from this false reporting, it would be a considerable amount. Jessica looked out the window while thinking. The betrayal was painful, but through it she rediscovered her own strength. She was confident she could live well enough on her own. Rather, she felt that walking a new life based on truth was much more valuable than continuing a false married life. 6 months later, Jessica was drinking coffee on the balcony of her new apartment while looking out at the Chicago cityscape. Cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom, and the long winter was finally coming to an end. All divorce proceedings were completed, and she had become legally and mentally free. The promotion at Philadelphia Biotech was realized as expected, and Jessica was currently working as Deputy Director of the International Sales Department. Due to the success of the European expansion project, she was highly evaluated within the company and was entrusted with even more responsible positions. Ironically, that painful business trip had become a major turning point in her career. Robert received a guilty verdict and a 6-month suspended sentence. False reporting and evidence tampering were serious crimes, but his first offense and deeply repentant attitude were taken into consideration. However, social sanctions were severe, many clients canceled contracts with him, and his credibility in the web design industry hit rock bottom. She had heard from mutual acquaintances that he was currently working at a small factory. Amanda Smith was also found guilty of property damage and was ordered to pay fines and damages. She subsequently left Chicago and returned to her hometown, she had heard. While Jessica sometimes felt anger toward her, as time passed, feelings of pity became stronger. The amount she received as alimony was considerable, but Jessica decided to use it as an investment for her new life. Moving to a luxury apartment near downtown, studying to obtain qualifications necessary for work, and attending painting classes she had wanted to do for years. Everything was fresh and fulfilling experiences for her. Once trust is lost, it's very difficult to regain. Jessica often remembered the words the lawyer had said during divorce mediation. She had thought love was the most important thing in married life, but she painfully realized that trust was actually the foundation. Her colleagues at work initially were concerned about Jessica's divorce, but seeing her positive attitude and concentration on work, they gradually began treating her normally. Particularly, Sarah, a woman in her 50s in the same department, became a good confidant, and they occasionally began having meals together. "Life is unpredictable," Sarah said one day. "But by overcoming difficulties, we discover strength we didn't even know we had." Jessica wholeheartedly agreed with those words. A year ago, she couldn't imagine life without her husband. But now, she truly enjoyed her time alone. Weekends were spent at museums and libraries, reading new books, visiting new places. She was enjoying the freedom of being able to decide everything according to her own will. Regarding romance, she didn't yet feel ready to seek new relationships. But she thought that was fine. Rebuilding her relationship with herself was the most important thing for her now. Sometimes good memories with Robert would come back. The happy early days of marriage, moments they laughed together, times they supported each other. Those memories were never fake, nor were they completely meaningless. It's just that the trust built on them was too fragile. Jessica opened her planner and checked next month's schedule. A short business trip to Germany, starting new painting classes, a long-awaited reunion with college friends. Everything was her choice, decided by her will. From the balcony, she could see a young couple walking hand in hand at the street corner. Jessica smiled. She sincerely hoped their relationship would continue forever. And she hoped they would nurture true love based on trust. The setting sun illuminated Chicago's skyscrapers, and orange light streamed into the room. Jessica took a deep breath and smiled quietly with gratitude for the new day and new life. The betrayal had once destroyed her life, but at the same time gave her true freedom and strength. She learned that true family was not just blood relations or legal bonds, but relationships where people respect and trust each other. And now, she was building the most trustworthy relationship with herself. That had become the solid foundation of her new life.